Hello, and welcome to the Write Club podcast, where we take you behind the pages and into the fascinating world of writing. I'm Beth, and as always, I'm joined by my co host, Mary. Hi, Mary, how are you?
Hi Beth, I'm great, thanks. Today we're joined by Alice Jolly. Alice Jolly writes novels, short stories, memoirs, and plays. She won the PEN Ackley Prize and the V.S. Pritchett Memorial Prize. Her novel Mary Ann Sate's Imbecile was on the long list for the Ondaatje Prize and was runner-up for the Rathbones Folio Prize. She's also been awarded an O. Henry Award. Her new novel, The Matchbox Girl, which is about Dr. Asperger, is out now.
Wow, what a list of achievements. Hi, Alice. Welcome to the podcast. Where is it that you're joining us from today?
So I'm joining you from Stroud in Gloucestershire.
Brilliant. And are you in your regular writing spot?
I am in my regular writing spot, which is a small room but very nice. But I'm also realizing as I sit here that all over my walls there is information to do with the Matchbox Girl. There's big maps of Vienna, there's photographs of people in the book, there's photographs I took when I went to Vienna. And actually, I should have taken all this down because the book's finished, but I feel a bit sad to take it down. So this has made me suddenly think, actually, that stuff now needs to go, but it is a bit heartbreaking. Um,
Yeah, I would say just leave it up, and then when you get onto your next novel, you can just go over the top of it.
I absolutely love The Matchbox Girl. I finished it yesterday and I had tingles up and down my neck as I read the last chapters. For listeners who haven't read it, could you give us a brief overview of the story?
Yes, so the novel's set in Vienna in the 1930s and early 1940s, and it tells the story of Dr. Asperger, who was a real person. Um, but the story is actually told from the point of view of a 12-year-old girl who is one of Dr. Asperger's patients. And so she tells us the story of what happened to the curative education ward in the Vienna Children's Hospital during the rise of fascism and then when the Reich came to power. So it's a book about a lot of different things. It honours those early researchers of autism and the extremely difficult circumstances they were working in. Um, but it's also about collaboration and what it's like to be in that situation where evil things are happening all around you and you're trying to think how to prevent that, but you're also thinking just how to survive.
Yeah, absolutely. Why did you want to write this story?
I think I've always been interested in collaboration. When I was a child, our days were filled with war films. The British were big into war films in that time. And it was always really clear that, we were the goodies and we defeated the baddies. But, even as a child, as I watched those films, I sort of thought, I'm not sure I'm getting the whole story here, really. I think it may have been a bit more complex than that. And I've always been interested when people have that conversation about what would I have done in that situation. Um, so that has always interested me. And then I became very interested in Dr. Asperger because the messages I received about him was so mixed. On he was claimed to be the father of neurodiversity, and his name was given to Asperger's syndrome, and there were still people who described themselves as Aspies and so on. And then there were also these dark rumours, and at the time when I first started writing this, they were just rumours. But then, after I'd already done quite a lot of research, I realised, oh no, these are not just rumours. Um, and I thought then, shall I just stop writing this novel? Because who wants to write a novel about a person who everyone is now really quite appalled by? But I kind of had to keep going because there was something about it that just didn't fit together. And I thought, I just need to understand more about what happened here.
Yeah, I absolutely loved it. And like you said about the good guys and the bad guys, there's all that in between, all those stories in between that we can't just look away from.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really important thing that the novel does. I think the novel is about nuance. It's about digging deep. It's never about sort of simple messages of good and evil. It's about asking people to really enter a situation where often the choices are only, is this a bad decision or is it a really bad decision? People were making appalling compromises. And I think the novel is quite uniquely placed to do that in a way, to push deeper and to ask us perhaps to empathise with people who we don't really want to empathise with. All of that's important to me.
I love the contrast as well, or the comparison between the neurodivergent scale and then this scale of good and bad. I thought the two were really interesting the way they sat together.
Yeah, and of course, they were sitting together in that time because all this important work in relation to autism was being done through the rise of fascism, and then the Nazis took Vienna. So, these doctors were researching this to try to make children's lives better and to understand more about certain kinds of behavior. And then they just found themselves in the eye of the storm because obviously when the Nazis came to power, I find it difficult to say it, but everybody knows, they were looking to get rid of the so-called useless eaters, and suddenly this research became slightly a matter of life and death, because it could be used to help children or not. And there are also other things. There's a lot in the book about order and disorder, and Adelaide loves order. And of course, fascism was a lot about order. And I don't think that Adelaide's love of order is actually particularly to do with neurodiversity. I think as the human race, we're not very good at disorder. So it's that question of how far we're prepared to go in order to have things organised, and the fact that actually all of us would like a really nice, organised world. But what the Nazis were prepared to do in order to create that world was totally unacceptable. So that's another way in which the micro and the macro bits of the story fit together.
Yeah, and why did you choose to use a neurodivergent ghost narrator?
It was a difficult decision, and I went through a lot of thinking about what was the right way to go. I knew that I needed someone who was peripheral, because again, the novel is partly about that. It's partly about what you can and can't see at any time. And Adelaide is very interesting in that respect, in that she's often really astute and accurate in her judgments about things, but then she often just misses stuff completely. And again, that might be as much to do with the human race as neurodiversity. But I was also realizing that those times were very confusing and very surreal in a horrible, dark way. And so the voice needed to be somebody who could understand and couldn't understand. And it was a difficult decision to do it like that because there was so much of history to tell. But I definitely wanted it to be a novel of voice as well.
Mm. Yeah, and there must have been a massive amount of research involved to write this novel. So how did you go about piecing this together? I mean, I know you've said that you've got loads of pictures on your walls of the characters and people that and pictures that you took in Vienna. So how much research did you have to do to create this?
Absolutely masses. And I think that was because there isn't a standard book. There's no biography of Asperger. Um, and so I had to use so many different sources of information. And initially, I was going to Vienna quite a bit. And then lockdown came and I couldn't go anymore. And yeah, I also got lucky in ways. Things just dropped into place sometimes because the whole story of Annie Rice and Georg Frankl, when I started writing the book, I knew they left Vienna, but I just didn't really know what happened to them. I knew they went to America, and I just thought, how am I ever going to write this bit of the book? Because I just don't know. And then at a certain point, you just go back and search the internet again and think, could there be something? And suddenly a whole paper pops up by an amazing woman in America who researched that whole subject. And suddenly it's like, oh, right, now I've got that bit of the book. But of course, you just don't know if those moments are going to happen or not.
Towards the end of the book, our narrator Adelheid says, "You insist that the man who hated labels must be neatly labelled, a brilliant pioneer of autism, research, or a murderer. The question is not so much about right and wrong. Instead, we ask which part of ourselves might feel the difference between the two." How did you make the connection between the two stories? of the his work with the autistic children and then the Nazi-occupied Vienna? Or is it just that those two stories were happening simultaneously?
I think those stories were happening simultaneously, but I think when you write a novel, it's really interesting. All of these links start appearing and you start seeing how it all fits together. Um, and I suppose I was just very inspired as well by him, and I should also say his colleagues, because in fact, one of the things that came out of my research was that it wasn't really him completely. He was relying a lot on other people's work. Um, and I was just so fascinated by the stories of those people. And again, they fitted together with the themes of neurodiversity. And also Adelaide, of course, is a big truth teller. And she's a dangerous truth teller because she's in a world where telling the truth can cost you your life. So again, she is struggling so much, not just with order, but with truth and with what you can and can't say. And also she's struggling with how to behave more generally. She doesn't really understand, and so she can't read lots of situations clearly. But again, she's an image for the whole of that society at that time because of course, we can look back on it now and we know how the story ends, but they didn't know that. They were just living it on a day-to-day basis. And so they didn't see the extreme evil that was coming towards them. Um, and so that relates to her. But as I say, it's the whole of that society at that time.
Very interesting how you talk about there being a language of nods and winks and looks that she didn't really understand at the start. And then she gradually sort of learns to interpret this language a little bit, doesn't she, throughout the book?
Yes, and that is because she has some amazing help. I mean, in particular, the kind of heroine of the story in a way is Sister Victorine Zack, who is lost to history because she was a nurse. Um, but Asperger described her as a genius, and I think she was very, very central to all of that work. And she helps Adelaide, and also the other people in the curative education ward accept her as she is and try to help her with things and show her things. But they're not really trying to change her. They can see that she has abilities. And I think that's what their approach was. And it's very amazing. They were so far ahead of their time. Asperger's question is, where does the line fall between disease and difference? And that was because they felt that at the time people were being categorized as having a disease or a problem when perhaps it was just difference. And of course, as well, they were realizing, and this seems obvious now, but it wasn't obvious at the time, that it's possible that people can face very severe challenges and struggle with daily life and also be very intelligent. And that was what they wanted to emphasize. And Adelaide isn't a genius, but she certainly has abilities, and she's certainly quite unique in her way of looking at in her way of looking at the world.
And moving on slightly, you're a prolific short story writer. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about what short story writing can teach us about writing a novel and how that might help you?
I think that short stories are actually the building block of so much because, yes, they're the building block of the novel, but they're also actually the building block of radio plays, films, TV, the building block of TV series. All of those things rely a lot on the scene or the small interaction, and that obviously is what the short story is doing. So I always say to people, read short stories, write short stories, go on short story courses, because if you learn to do that well, then it's going to help you so much. Because I think there is an argument that says that the novel is about 20 or 30 short stories stitched together. And I think it is. What I don't agree with is when people say writing a good short story is as hard as writing a novel. I think writing a good short story is really hard, but a novel is much, much harder because the thing is, you've not only got to write your 20 short stories, you've got to make them all sit together and link together. So it is very difficult, but at the heart of it, as I say, lies those scenes, those small interactions, those little changes, which don't have to be at all dramatic, but then they play out over the course of the novel and they gain in power as you go on. So, yeah, I love the short story. And I think for people wanting to learn, it's an amazing place to start.
Mm,
And would
yeah.
you suggest starting it as a scene if you were going to write a short story? Is that how you think of it, as a scene?
I think of it as a moment of change. And as I say, it can be a very small change. And it often is a scene. There often are two people and some interaction. But I mean, of course, it could be a scene with no words. But I feel as though it can just be one character in a short story. But I tend not to do that because it is the interaction that I find interesting. And in particular, I'm looking for emotional shifts. When does somebody slightly change emotionally? And also, I'm looking at what one character does to another character, because when you study theatre, you realise that people aren't just having conversations, they're doing things within that conversation. And so short stories can take many, many different forms. And I never really feel it's worth debating, what does and doesn't count as a short story. But for me, it often is a scene, yes.
Mm.
Mm. Yeah, I find short stories fascinating to read and also to write because the technique is so different to write in a short story than it is to write a full-length novel. I entered a writing competition, was it last year? It's been almost a year ago now, probably. Um, and that was really, I found that really difficult because I like to ramble, as you probably can tell. Um, and being able to get everything that I wanted to say down onto the page in the word limit and also have it not feel like I was missing anything out, I found really difficult. Um, so yeah, hats off to you for for sticking with it and being able to keep on writing those.
Yeah, no, I think it is a real discipline, but I think as well, it's fine to write something long first. I mean, everything I write is always too long to begin with, and actually it sometimes stays too long. But there's that thing, isn't there? You just put a load of stuff down and then you begin to pick out what exactly you want. But the short story is very definitely interesting in terms of what you have to cut. But what I feel about cutting things is that if you've written something and you cut it, it's somehow still there.
Mm,
And I use that to sort of comfort myself to think, no, no, it's there somewhere within it. And so that makes me feel better when I have to chop big sections of a work.
yeah, I can imagine it is difficult when you become so attached to a piece of work. Pressing that backspace button feels criminal. And not only do you write short stories, you also write plays and novels. So how do you decide which shape a story idea is going to take?
Um, I sort of don't really. I find those categories quite difficult. I find it a little bit limiting that, we have the novel and it's this length and the short story and it's that length. But there are always things that don't quite fit in those categories. So again, I'm more inclined just to start writing and see where it takes me. I think I also have a bit of a strange relationship with length. I'm always worrying that my work is too long, and I think it is. The other day, my 14-year-old daughter said to me, Mum, you need to stop fat shaming your novel. I've done a I've done a lot of fat shaming of my novels. So
Brilliant.
but what I think that at the moment I'm actually writing a new book, which is probably going to be about 80,000 words. And to me, I think that's only really a short story. But it is obviously that is the length of a novel. So I feel like, yes, my relationship to the length of a work is a bit complicated. And also I do actually want to defend the longer novel because as a reader, I love books that you can get really lost in. And sometimes I'm reading a novel and I'm enjoying it, and then it finishes, and I think it was just too short. I just wanted
Mm.
more.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same.
Yeah, it is really nice to have one of those books where you can just have it to read for quite some time and you can live in that world for longer, especially like you say, if you're enjoying it, it's such a shame when you've read a book in a couple of sittings because you did love it so much that you needed to finish it, but then also you get sad when it's over, and especially if it's not part of a series, it's just a standalone.
Mm.
It is nicer to have those books every now and then. I tend to with my reading pattern, I tend to go like big book, shorter book, longer book, shorter book, just to split my time up a little bit and the variety of the things that I'm reading. And I find that I do feel more affected when I finish a longer book, as long as I'm enjoying it anyway.
It's like a luxury. I think it's like a long bath when you can read a really lovely long book and then that horrible but also lovely feeling when you finish, when you're so sad that you missed them all and you're sort of grieving that world that you
Mm,
were in.
Yeah,
yeah.
I also think that since we say that there are beach books, I feel there's also log fire books or
Oh,
Absolutely.
sitting by the radiator books, those kind of winter
Yeah.
evening books,
Yeah.
which is that, and also often in winter you do just want to be taken to a different place. And so
100%.
absolutely.
that
Yeah.
again, that feeling, because there are some books you don't read, you live them. Um, and yes, it can be hard to sort of get out of that. I occasionally read a book that's so good that I think, oh, I'm not going to be able to start another book for a few days now because it's not going to be as good.
I feel
Mhm.
sorry for the next book as well. Like, well, you've got a lot to live up to now. Yeah, this book for me, the Matchbox Girl, I was on the sofa with my weighted blanket and I was in that world, heaven. Did you always know that you wanted to be a writer? And can you tell us a little bit about your path to publication?
The first bit of that's easy, and the second bit, don't get me started. But anyway, the first bit of it, yes, I did always know. And when I think I was about 8, I felt that I had written a novel. I'm sure that was actually about 4 pages, but um, so I was always writing as a child, and then I somehow lost my confidence when I went to university, and I didn't really start writing again until my late 20s. And then I've had quite an up and down publishing situation because I had a 2 book deal when I was quite young from Simon and Schuster, and then I didn't write a novel for a while, or at least I didn't publish a novel, and I was writing plays. And then I had a lot of difficulty getting my work published, and I published with Unbound, and now I'm published by Bloomsbury. Um, so yeah, it's been very up and down. I think what I always say to people is put your work and your create put your work and your creativity in one box and put publishing and agents and marketing in another box, and don't let the contents of the two boxes mix, because I think what keeps you going as a writer is the love of the work and the love of words and the desire to bring this world you've imagined to the page, and all of that is great. But as soon as it then becomes about who's going to publish this and who's going to read it and how can it be marketed, somehow the energy starts going out of the project quite quickly at that point. And so I do find the whole business of publication really pretty difficult. And as I say, I just try to think all I'm trying to achieve is that I need to write a book that makes it possible for me to get another book published. That's all I want to do, is get another book published. And I think at the moment I'm doing that. So, um, yes, I think if you have too much engagement with the publishing industry, you can finish up a bit mad quite quickly.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's really brilliant advice. And a lot of people will really also struggle. Like a lot of the people that we speak to really struggle with that business side of things as well. We actually have a column in our magazine called Business of Writing that Simon Whaley does for us. And that is a really valuable. I mean, every month when I read that, I take something away from it because it's just such a complex world that you, like you say, if you focused on it all day, every day, you could really get yourself in a hole. And there is a lot to it, so you could easily spend 90% of your time doing that rather than the actual writing. So I think it's really important that people, one, write what they love and what they want to read. Um, Focus on the what you want rather than the how you're going to get there, and then find the how after, if that makes sense. So once you've got where you want to be, then look at the publishing side of things and the business side where you have to love it first before you think about even trying to make any money from it.
Yeah, and that will kill the creativity pretty quickly.
Oh yeah, massively.
Mm. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm always saying to people, even if you get that longed for dream with a mainstream publisher, it may be that the book won't be reviewed, or it won't sell many copies, or it'll be published in a way that you don't like, or something. So um, it's really important for you to like what you've written. And if you publish it yourself in quite a cheap and cheerful way, and 30 of your friends read it, actually, no, that's great. That's really good, because you can still come back to it and go, yeah, I'm proud of that. I think that was,
Absolutely.
and having that feeling. Whereas, if you really start writing a lot for the market, it may turn out that that doesn't really work out, and you'll also be looking at the book and thinking, oh, and I didn't even like that book. At which point you've really lost everything there. So the work's got to come first.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And what does a typical writing day look like for you, if there is such a thing?
I'm always best if I get going early. So this morning I had to drop my daughter at a bus at 3 minutes past 7, and that's really good because then I can come back and get some breakfast, and I can probably get working before 8. Um, and then I'll sort of go through to about 10:30 or maybe a bit later. I've just always been quite bad in the afternoon and the evening. I think I'm getting a little bit better, but definitely morning is really good for me. But I've been through times of my life when I've found it really difficult. And I think one of the things I tell myself is tell myself there is actually nothing that can't wait 2 hours. Unless your kid is actually in the A&E, everything else can wait, because of course there's always some other thing you're meant to be doing. So just carving out that time and thinking, I don't care who calls or what anybody needs or anything, I'm just going to do that. But it does take discipline, and I think particularly in the modern world it takes discipline where there's so much going on.
Yeah, there's so many distractions, isn't there, that it is very easy for you to kind of give yourself permission to procrastinate constantly, which I know is something that I struggle with all the time. Like you say, there is something else that I could always be doing rather than the hard nitty-gritty stuff that I'm kind of putting off because it's going to take up too much time or too much energy or it's just too difficult for me. How do you get around that? Distractions and stuff. Do you find that you're quite good at ignoring the rest of the world and just knuckling down? Or do you have any tips?
um I am reasonably good at it. um I think the other thing that I always say to myself and to other people is not to get into that thing where you're rewriting the first and second page again and again, or rewriting little bits of it again and again. Um, I feel like you get on better if you just push through stuff. So my books I tend to write them first very quickly. I do a very quick first draft. There's about 3 months of work there. And I just put it all down, and it doesn't even make sense. And the names of the characters change halfway through. And someone who's born in 1960 is 60 years old in 1980. And, it's just none of the times or anything add up properly. But I don't allow myself to go back and change it. And then after that, I just keep sort of working through it. But I'm always sort of moving on through it, because I feel that if you do that thing of polishing little bits of it, you get very attached to those bits of it when you might need to change them. And also, the whole thing is changing all the time. As you go through it, you can then look back and see how it needs to change. It's always better somehow to have quite a lot of text on the page, then you feel you've got something to change. Whereas if you haven't got a lot of it, then I think you sort of lose confidence. So that's always sort of my trick for not getting stuck, is just to keep moving on.
Mm, that's brilliant advice.
Could you give our listeners a book recommendation?
Yes, I reviewed a book last year called Dark Like Under by Alice Chadwick, and it's published by Daunt Books. And it was such a beautiful debut novel, just very beautifully written. It's not about a big exceptional subject, it's about a school in the 1980s and a tragedy happens, and it's about how everybody reacts to that. But for me, it's just the quality of the prose and the sense of place. That was one of those books where I was absolutely there in the book. And it's quite long, and but I was just lost in it the whole time. So I absolutely love that.
That sounds great. And are you working on something new that you can tell us a little bit about?
Yes, I'm actually working on two different things. Publishing is always a bit weird because when a publisher agrees to take your book, it might be 18 months, it usually is 18 months before the book actually comes out. So you've sort of always started the next book and are quite far into it by the time a book comes out. So I had started something else, but I've also been writing a memoir. And my idea was that the novel was the difficult project and I would do that in the mornings, but then in the evenings I could just do a bit of the memoir because that was an easier thing to do. And now it's turning out that the memoir isn't easy. And um, and I'm also thinking, God, what am I doing this for? But I think I will keep doing it. So I don't normally do, two things in parallel, but that's just happened at the moment. And mainly, I'm just really enjoying being back into the writing because when the Matchbox Girl came out, there's a while where you've got to do quite a lot of publicity things. And I'm glad to be able to do that, but at the same time, it's not my main work. So now I'd sort of given myself a deadline of the end of the last year and said to myself, right, in the new year, you're getting on with the new stuff. And so yeah, it feels exciting. I do love new work as well. I think one of the difficulties with the novel is that it's a really long project. And by the time you're about halfway through the project, you've actually slightly lost interest in it.
Mm,
That thing that fired you up has slightly gone, and then you've still got 50% of the work to do to actually make it happen. And particularly the end of novels, I just find terrible, particularly the proofreading and all of that. I mean, I've cried with boredom sometimes, when you're just going over the same stuff and checking one tiny thing after another. And also, you can never believe, I mean, I've done it so many times, but I still just don't believe how long all that takes. And I send a manuscript to a publisher and I think that's really pretty finished. And it just comes back with hundreds of changes and they're all legitimate. And I'm just like, oh my God, I can't believe how much stuff there is to change. So it's such a long process, a novel. It really is.
Do you have any advice for that difficult middle bit? Because we do hear this quite a lot that you get to the middle and you sort of lose the willpower a little bit.
I suppose that I get somebody to read at certain points, and that sort of energizes it because they have a different view and point out, okay, this is what needs to be developed or whatever. Um, and yeah, I think also just getting it away from it sometimes. I mean, you can just get too lost in things. I think also, I'm always writing and planning at the same time, and also standing back from it and planning is helpful because you get to a stage where you've just got loads and loads of stuff and you can't really see how you're ever going to put it together. And if you can do this or someone can help you to sort of find the spine, I think that's so important because you then think, right, this is what this book's about and this is the key story of it. And then it's like an animal. If the spine doesn't work properly, none of the limbs work properly. But once you get the spine, then suddenly you're like, oh, right, now I see how to put it together. So I think it's definitely worth seeking some help when you get to that moment when you just got loads and loads of stuff, but you're just not quite sure how to put it all together.
Yeah, that just made me think of the Matchbox Girl and how she's got her collection of matchboxes that she's moving around all the time because she knows there's a perfect order for them, but she's always changing it. And then quite often the doctors or the nurses would come in and make suggestions. And that just popped into my head when you were talking about that.
Yes, well, I guess that thing about order, we also want a degree of order in our novel, or we need a degree of order because the reader needs to know where they're going. So, yes, I mean, I'm always amazed by how much of writing a novel is cutting and pasting. I mean, God knows what people did before the cut and paste function on the computer, because, yes, just moving text around the place is a lot of what you're doing quite often.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for talking to us today. It's been really interesting to chat to you. And yeah, thank you for joining us on the Right Club podcast.
Well, thank you very much. It's really lovely to chat to you.
Yeah, it's been brilliant having you on. So thanks again. Thanks for tuning into the Right Club. We hope you enjoyed this episode and feel inspired to keep writing. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at Writers Online, your go-to for writing tips, competitions, and exclusive updates. Plus, you'll never miss an episode of the Right Club. Until next time, happy writing.